Welcome to the third annual Joyce Axelrod Lecture here at Mingei International Museum. If we haven't met, I think I know almost everyone in the room, but there's a few new faces. I'm Jessica Hanson-York. I'm the executive director here at Mingei, and it's really fantastic to see you all here tonight. We have friends of the museum. We have friends of Joyce. We're always happy to have friends of Joyce here. And all of you who are part of our special arts community here in San Diego. Thank you for joining us. This annual event is an opportunity for the museum to bring someone special to town, to highlight a voice and a perspective that feels connected to our mission. To hear from someone who can help illuminate and explore the creativity and the craft that draw people here to Mingei. This year, that person is Mira Nakashima, and we are honored to have her here tonight. Thank you for joining us, Mira. When we first invited Mira here to deliver a keynote lecture, I had a feeling this was going to be a hot ticket. And we really have maxed out the number of chairs in this room. I don't think we've ever squeezed so many people in. Thank you for all being a little bit cozy tonight. I think that's great. We are going to get you all on the elevators as efficiently as we can when the lecture ends so that we can all head upstairs and enjoy the reception. So bear with us as we move that crowd in a little bit, but it'll be nice to enjoy some food and a drink in the courtyard together later. I want to acknowledge Joe Fish for funding this event tonight and for helping all of us come together to celebrate Joe. Thank you so much for funding this in honor of Joyce. I thank you on behalf of the staff and the trustees. We're grateful to have this annual opportunity. We also have some related events happening this weekend, including a film screening and a talk here in this theater tomorrow. I think both are sold out, and I am so thrilled that there are so many people in this community who are passionate and excited about coming together to dive deeper into discussion about the Nakashima story and about craft and about furniture. And there's one person in the room here who has already done that deep dive, someone who always does her homework before this annual event. Many of you know Joyce Axelrod, but just in case you don't, let me tell you, she is curious and engaged. She's a lover of the arts and a friend to artists always. She's a supporter of Mingei and so many other cultural organizations here in our city. And she's a lady who makes things happen. I'm really glad to know her. And Joyce, I'd like to invite you up to say a few words, please.
Jessica, thank you. That's lovely. Thank you very much. Well, I am thrilled to see such a crowd here and a welcome group for Mira Nakashima, who is actually on a return trip to San Diego. I remember her, I met her here in 2003 when Martha Longenecker had a Nakashima retrospective. And I don't know how many of you remember that. It's hard to believe. 2003 was 24 years ago, and I believe that Mira and I were probably brunettes at the time. I also want to take a moment to thank Joe Fish, my husband, who surprised me 3 years ago with this annual giving for a lecture here. You know how much it means to me. He's not looking at me even. And I also want to acknowledge you, Jessica, and Emily Hanna, and the whole staff of Mingei for all the hard work and thoughtful work that they put into having these annual lectures. But more than that is the brilliance that they showed in selecting the guest speakers for the lecture. Well, for instance, year one, we had Glenn Adamson. And many of you may not recognize his name, but if you're an artist, you know who Glenn Adamson is. He is a writer of arts and crafts. He is a lecturer and very well known in the community. His visit last year was magical for me because he was so accessible, and both of his lectures both days were so wonderful. And I remember one particular thing that he kept saying over and over, and it's stuck with me. He says, craft matters because it's the art world's best path to diversity. So year two was a real coup for Mingei. They had Preston Singletary, a world-renowned Native American glass artist, whose one-man show at the Smithsonian was a standout. While here, he debunked stereotypes of Native Americans and the materials that they used. And he actually really encouraged unconventional materials for the indigenous people, like glass. And we were able to have a Mingei acquisition that is upstairs, and it features a beautiful basket of his that is breathtakingly beautiful. So look for Preston Singletary's acquisition. Now year three. Thank you, Mira, for coming here from your home in New Hope, Pennsylvania. You are the president and the creator and director of the George Nakashima Woodworkers. You graduated from Harvard, and I think it was in 1963 and then went on to receive a master's degree in architecture. You have carried forward your father's work and legacy for many decades, while also being a gifted designer and craftsperson as well. You have received a myriad of honors, and you've lectured all around the world. But tonight you are ours. Before you speak, I want to invite Jessica up here to set the stage and tell us why there are more than 60 Nakashima creations that grace this museum, and about the very special bond between Mingei and Nakashima. Come up and help us out. Thanks.
Thank you, Joyce. So to work here at Mingei is to be surrounded by the exquisite designs and the unparalleled craftsmanship of Nakashima studio furniture. On our entry level, you'll find that inviting bench to perch on, right? You all know what I mean. In our library, you'll see the well-used pedestal desk that our librarian, Christy Eric Burgess, gets to sit at every day, and a generous and gorgeous reading table surrounded by those iconic Konoe chairs. And of course, in the Founders Gallery, there is the table. You all know the table. You know what I mean. It's the one that elicits a gasp for many of our visitors when they first walk into that room. There's a little story about this table. It was designed by George Nakashima, Mira's father, in 1959, and it was built by Mira in 1996. And Mira also designed 2 additions to the table, which came a few years ago. The table was a gift to the museum from the artist Nikki de St. Phal. Nikki was a close friend of our founder, Martha Longenecker. And I know Rob Seidner's in the room, so I bet he can add some more color to this story later at the reception if you find him. And in 1996, Mingei was planning a big move from its original space in La Jolla at University Town Center to this building here in Balboa Park. And Nikki wanted to contribute something significant. She wanted to give a housewarming gift of sorts to Mingei. So Nikki asked Martha what she needed. And Martha told her that she wanted a piano for concerts in the theater. Nikki thought about this, and she said no. She told Martha, anyone can get you a piano. What you really need is a Nakashima table. And I think Martha quickly saw the wisdom in this. Thank goodness. The table was delivered later that year, and I just learned from Mira last night that it also arrived with a few of her personal dining chairs because she had a short timeline to produce the seats to go around the table. Sometimes when I walk into the Founders Gallery, I'll find a visitor, one who is likely a woodworker, crouched down with his head under the table, closely examining the joinery. This happens all the time. You know, people really respond to it. I think it is the most photographed object in the museum. We have 62 pieces of Nakashima furniture in Mingei's permanent collection, many of which are Mira's original designs. In fact, you can see our newest piece out in the space behind the theater here where you walked in, a really elegant three-legged table that just arrived recently. And it was an absolute joy to walk through the museum with Mira last night, watching her reconnect with the chairs and the tables that she made so many years ago, greeting them as if they were old friends. Nakashima Studio is rooted in history and it's rooted in tradition, but it's also a place that is current and alive. It is a place that is innovating with design. It is a place where a new generation of woodworkers are trained and mentored. And it's a place that has evolved over decades under Mira's leadership. She is an impressive woman, an American craft icon, and someone who has dedicated herself to good design as she leads her practice and her foundation in New Hope, Pennsylvania. The philosophy at the heart of Mingei lies in celebrating the beauty of simple objects, things made carefully and made thoughtfully for everyday use. And every Nakashima piece in this museum is imbued with that spirit. I read an interview with Mira in which she said, "Remember that less is more. Don't complicate things just to be different." And yet, her work and the work of the studio is singular. It is organic and symmetrical, beautiful and functional, uncomplicated for sure, but full of soul. How that happens is best explained by the artist herself. And I'd like to invite Mira up to share her story with us. Welcome, Mira.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Jessica. I hope I can live up to your introduction. It was quite an introduction. Thank you. I wanted to dedicate my presentation this evening to Martha Longenecker because she was the first one I met in 1994 or so. She had a show that was called Kindred Spirits, and she had the wisdom to put together the Japanese Mingei tradition, with which she was very familiar with because she'd studied pottery with Shoji Hamada and Shimazaki sensei, as she used to say, in Japan. So she was very familiar with the Japanese definition of Mingei. And so it's a young Nagi realized in the 1920s that the very strong and beautiful craft traditions in that part of the world were going to disappear with the mechanization, with the industrialization of Japan, unless he did something about it. So he founded the Mingei movement. I just bought some of your books from the bookstore because I need to review what that all meant. But I'll tell you a story. When I was trying to figure out how to write my book, which was called Nature, Form, and Spirit, and it's totally out of print. It was published in 2003. Martha very patiently waited until my book was published, and she had the first venue of the Nakashima show here at the Mingei Museum. I'm very grateful for that, but she helped curate the show, and it traveled to several different places. But ever since 1995, when Martha selected a piece of my dad's furniture, one of the early milk house tables, as a bridge between the shaker and the Japanese traditions, I felt like she and I were also kindred spirits. She recognized the value of making things by hand out of natural materials, and expanded the original meaning of Mingei to include international crafts and art. And when my father first passed away, I was trying to write, when I wrote my book in 2003, I had been in charge of the studio for 13 years, and I was still trying to figure out what I was doing and why I was doing it and what Dad was doing and why he did what he did. And the thing that gave me direction in writing my book was The Unknown Craftsman. So I'm very grateful to Soetsu Yanagi for formulating what that meant. It goes way back with him to the Zen traditions in Japan. It involves, and this was why it made sense to me, is my father was in India in 1936 to 39 and became a disciple of Sri Aurobindo. He received the name from Sri Aurobindo, which is he who delights in beauty. And during that period of time when he was working on the very first reinforced concrete building built in India, he not only had to know craftsmanship, he had to know engineering. He was trained as an architect before he turned to furniture. He had been trained in the Western tradition to develop your ego and be strong and do something different and all that stuff. And he realized with the Sri Aurobindo experience that that's not the way it works. The artist is just a conduit for a power greater than he. And the conduit must connect with the materials that they use. And that's the way true craft is born. And so Soetsu Yanagi and Sri Aurobindo were basically saying the same thing. I'm not sure my father actually met Soetsu Yanagi while he was in Japan. He worked in Japan in 1934 to 36 at the office of Anton and Raymond as an architect. And he may have bumped into Yanagi, I don't know, but he embodied Yanagi and he gave me the form that I needed to finish my book. So I'm very grateful to Yanagi for saying what he did and doing what he did and for creating the Mingei movement. And I just will tell you that my father in 1964 went to Japan. I was studying in Japan. And he went to visit some people that he'd met who were Japanese craftsmen who'd come to work on the Japanese pavilion in the World's Fair in New York in 1964. And he became friends with an artist there. And Dad invited all these Japanese craftsmen to come and have a steak dinner at Nakashima's. And back then, Japanese didn't eat steak very often, and they were very impressed that just this person invited them to have steak dinner. And so they reciprocated and said, please come visit us sometime. So in 1964, Dad took me with him and visited these people who called themselves the Minguren group in Takamatsu in southern Japan. And it's an offshoot of the Mingei movement. And they were attempting to create new forms of design and craft, maintaining the old traditions. And so Dad embraced them. He became one of the Mingei group. We still work with them. The older people, my dad's generation, are gone from the shop and from the organization, but the next generation are working with me. So it's very nice that it's a generational thing. We're very grateful to that. We also have a friend named we did have a friend named Toshiko Takayuzu, who was of the same generation of my father. You're probably familiar with her work. She was a tremendous ceramic artist. I just attended the opening for her show at the Noguchi Museum a few weeks ago, and it's incredible the amount of work that she did before Cranbrook, at Cranbrook, afterwards, and just all the. My grandson went with me. He's 20, and he said, Toshiko was about my size. He said, how did she create these pots that were taller than her and bigger than her? It's a mystery. But I asked her once something about, I felt that she should exhibit her work. Oh, I asked her when the Nakashima show was coming to the Mingei. I said, Toshiko, your work would look so beautiful with the Nakashimas. And she says, I'm not Mingei. And I thought, oh, sorry. But I think she was thinking of it in very narrow terms about the traditional Mingei. But I heard her speaking on NPR one day, and she was talking about the philosophy of allowing the material to work through your hands and not let your ego get in the way. And I thought, she's Mingei, she just doesn't want to admit it. And I curated a show of her work and Noguchi's work and my father's after they were all, well, Toshiko was still, actually Toshiko came, she was still alive, and she came to my show of Noguchi and Nakashima. Noguchi and Nakashima go together really well too. I don't think Noguchi minded being called Mingei, and his life was almost exactly parallel to my father's. They were born within a year of each other, and they died within a year of each other. They had studios at the end of their lives on the same island in Japan. They never communicated terribly much, but they thought kind of the same way. They embraced the Japanese techniques and tradition and made it into something new and different. So that's what I was born into. I didn't realize all that when I was born, but I was born just before the Japanese Americans on the West Coast were incarcerated. So I was on the Minidoka Desert at the age of 6 weeks, and fortunately did not remember very much. We are in New Hope because of Anton and Raymond, who was my father's employer in Tokyo. And they had left Japan in 1939 because of the war, came back to the US by way of South America and Europe because they couldn't come directly here from Japan. And they bought an old farmhouse in Bucks County. And Dad's professor at MIT contacted the Raymonds and said, can you please sponsor Nakashimas to leave camp? Because if you had a sponsor on the East Coast, they would let you out. And so Mrs. Raymond mostly filled out the forms and got us to Bucks County in 1943. And after the war, Dad went out on his own, and I have some pictures of the old shop that he had, which was in a garage. He said it was a studio with only 3 sides. He said it got pretty cold in the winter. It was a garage, and eventually he built the 4th wall. But he started out very simply. And then he found the property where we are now, and he really fell in love with the property because it's a south-facing slope, but he didn't have any money to buy it. So he found the owner of the property, who was also an MIT graduate, and said, could I please have 3 acres of land to live on and work on, and I will pay it in labor on your farm. So he did, and that was our first 3 acres. And as time went on, he made enough. He built the shop first, because he knew he had to make a living, and then he built the house second. In the meantime, we lived in an old army tent. But Dad was a good camper. My mother was not such a great camper, but we survived. So I guess I'll just get on with the slideshow and fill in the story as we go along. I remember when I first met Martha, and she realized that there was this connection between the Japanese craft tradition and the shaker craft tradition. And my father, you're probably aware of Morris Graves, the artist who lived in Seattle and did some kind of weird drawings. But he was my dad's best friend when we lived in Seattle in the 1940s. There weren't too many people who understood Indian philosophy back then. And so they became really good friends. And Morris Graves kept all of our things for us when we were incarcerated in the camp. And he gave them all back to us afterwards. A lot of people were not so lucky. But he had given my father a book on shaker furniture back in the 1940s. And when I was researching my book, I found it in the studio, and it was well read. You could tell that there were little pages that had kind of been looked at very often. So I knew that had influenced my father. It wasn't just the forms, it was the philosophy behind the forms, the way they were made, the way they used the material was very much akin to the way my father used things and the way he learned to use things in Japan. And that incarceration was a tough time for all of us. But Dad met a Japanese carpenter who was trained in Japan while we were in camp. And he and this guy his name is Gentaro Hikogawa, and I have a picture of him in the slideshow, but they worked as each other's apprentices. Dad was the designer, and Hikogawa was the maker, basically, but Dad learned a lot through the making from Hikogawa. Probably learned as much of the making from Hikogawa as Hikogawa learned from Dad about design. So that was a great learning experience. Although it was not a pleasant time for my mom. We all survived. Have most of you been to Japan at all? Yes? Oh, so you know how the craft tradition goes on there. And as Jessica was saying, we have had she hadn't told the whole story, but we have had a manager for I think almost 17 years who went to RIT, and then he was on the bench at Thomas Moser, and then he became one of the managers at Thomas Moser. His parents were ill, and they lived in the Philadelphia area, so he came back, and I had too much to do after my dad died, and I said, I really need somebody to help me manage, and I figured he would be the ideal person. Not only did he know design, he knew furniture making, but he'd worked with a family business. So he did come to us, and he realized that unless we keep hiring younger and younger people and training them, we're going to be done. So we're very fortunate. It's very exciting. I had a session with the San Diego Fine Woodworking Association this morning, and there were a lot more women in that group than there used to be. And we have 2 young women woodworkers coming to work with us. One of them is working part-time. She's finishing up her college. There's another one who actually apprenticed in a Japanese woodworking school and is Japanese American. So I'm really looking forward to having those people work with us. We do have one lady woodworker, and I didn't think she was going to survive. She's been with us almost 20 years now, and she's the head of the shop, and she's planning to retire. So we have to figure out what to do with the next generation. But thank goodness the women are also working in wood now. And I didn't think this woman who's with us would last, but boy, she's tough. It helps. Keeps the guys in shape. So let me see if I can push the right button. Can I do this? Ooh, it worked. Yay. This is one of the first buildings that my dad worked on in Japan. It's in Karuizawa. It's up in the mountains outside of Tokyo, and it's obviously a wooden building. Antonin Raymond was from Czechoslovakia, so everybody says it was probably this Raymond design. But my father also, when he was a young man, used to go up to Alaska and over to go fishing in the summertime. So I think Dad also had knowledge of those forms, but it's what they call now indigenous architecture. The wood was cut from trees, entirely from the property. The stone also came from the property, and it was built in 1934. And it's still a major tourist attraction. There's, everybody, has to line up and sign up to have their weddings there, and it's still a very functional church, and it's lasted a long time. When they were building it, they relied completely on the master builders to figure out the dimensions and the angles and what size beams they needed to build it with. Apparently, the Raymond office just sort of went with what the carpenters wanted to do and didn't know how tall it was until it was finished. And that's a technique that my dad kind of learned while he was working with Raymond. This is the second great building that my dad built when he was with the Raymond office. It's called Golconda, the first reinforced concrete building built in India. And it was designed basically in Tokyo, and it was built in collaboration with the Tokyo office, but my dad was the architect on site, and it was a completely new adventure for the, none of the craftsmen knew how to do concrete. They didn't have cement even. They didn't even have sand that was suitable to make concrete with. They had to import all of the steel. Dad had to design the formwork, and one of the stories about the formwork was that the cheap wood they gave him to use for forms didn't work because it didn't stay flat. So the mother of the ashram, whose name was Mira Alfalsa, said, well, I guess you better use teak. So he used teak for the formwork. And it sounds extravagant, but he could reuse it like a dozen, maybe 20 times. So it wasn't, it worked out in the end. And it's still in excellent condition. There was a show of 20th century Indian architecture at the Museum of Modern Art in New York a couple of years ago. This was the very first reinforced concrete building built on the entire continent of India. And it was a major adventure in building, in construction, but it was also my dad's great spiritual adventure working with Sri Aurobindo. And it has this, it still works. Unfortunately, it's a much busier city than it used to be. It has a natural ventilation system. I think this will, no, I guess not. Each of the rooms there has louvers on both sides, so it's completely cross-ventilated. And if any of you have been in South India, it's very hot and very humid all the time, but it's tolerable because of the natural ventilation system. I don't know, I guess people don't like the bugs. You do have to have some mosquito netting. But it was very groundbreaking technology at the time. Oh, and this is the picture on the left is my mother and dad's wedding picture. My mother, I don't think ever wore a kimono after that, but she did on one occasion. And the picture on the right is my paternal grandmother holding me the day that we went to camp. I was only 6 weeks old. And one thing my parents and my family decided to do if we were sent to this place on the Idaho desert, they decided that they would be together. At least we'd have each other. And so we did have each other. My father's younger brother is there on the far left, and my mother's sister is there behind her holding me. And my maternal grandfather is there on the right. So I don't remember ever feeling deprived. I was probably lucky that I had all of my relatives with me there. And this is my father on the left with his blueprints. And he'd put blueprints on the walls to try to keep the wind and the sand from coming into the building where his little shop was. And the fellow on the right is Gentaro Hikogawa. He's working on a piece of bitterbrush, which was the stuff that was growing in the desert, and that was what was available to make things out of. You've worked on bitterbrush, have you? Somebody's there shaking his head. It doesn't grow that anymore. They've irrigated it all, and the bitterbrush doesn't grow anymore, but it was plentiful back there. It was so plentiful they used to use it for fuel sometimes for our wood coal stoves. But many of our incarcerees would realize that it had beautiful forms if you worked on them long enough and sanded them and scraped them and so forth. So that's Gentaro working on a little piece of bitterbrush there. These are some of the tools that we used, or I didn't use them, Dad used them. We use them in the shop now. But the Japanese saws are pretty special, and Dad was always very meticulous about keeping the blades sharp. Here's some of that bitterbrush. There's that top view is some of the few remaining pieces we have in the studio. And then some of you know Wendy Maruyama. She's she's a very famous lady woodworker in San Diego. I met her, I think, at the first time in 2003 when I was here with Martha. She was doing a series of shows on the incarceration, and I was asked to do something with her down at Penland in North Carolina. And so I thought, well, there's only a few pieces of that bitterbrush left, but I think I'm going to do, use something, some piece of bitterbrush to make something as a symbol of what we went through during the war. So the top of it is a Noguchi lamp. The stem is made from bitterbrush, and the bottom of it is a piece of maple burl from Oregon. So in 1943, my dad's professor from MIT contacted the Raymonds, who had left Japan and bought this farm down in Pennsylvania, and they said, can you please sponsor the Nakashima so they can get out of camp? So they did, and these are pictures of Raymond Farm. That's me and one of the farm hands by the barn where the cows lived on the left, and I'm there next to the chicken houses there on the right with my mother. But we were just so glad to get out of the desert and be free again. Even though Dad said chickens and he were not psychologically compatible. And this is the very first the piece of furniture that Dad built on the Raymond farm in their old milk house. And when Dad did a show in 1989, the curator said, you got to call it something, what's its history? And Dad said, well, I built it in the milk house, so it's been the milk house ever since. And this was the piece that Martha borrowed in her Kindred Spirits show as an example of sort of the cross-fertilization between the Shakers and the Japanese. And the planks were pieces of teak, which I believe my father might have brought all the way from India when he came back from India. And Morris Graves, his friend, kept them for us and gave them back to him. And this is one of the first pieces he made on the East Coast. And this is the little workshop where we went after Raymond Farm. It was a broken down house that had not been inhabited for a number of years, and this was the garage, which became my dad's workshop. And the WRA was sent out to take pictures of us to prove that the incarceration did not hurt us, that we were doing fine. And so they dressed me up in my little white dress and stuck me on Dad's workbench, and there I am playing in the shop. Here's another picture of the WRA pictures, working in the shop. And that's my maternal grandfather on the very first grass-seated chair that he made. It was made at the request of René Darnoncourt, who was with the director of the Museum of Modern Art in New York at the time. And Dad had made him a table, and he says, I would like you to make me a chair as well. So Dad sweated over that for, I think, a year or two before he actually figured out how to make this chair. He had to learn how to steam bend the back and put it in form so that it would keep the form after he took it off. And the first seats, you can't really tell in this picture, but I think my mother used package twine because that's all we had to make the seats out of at the time. And then after a while, Dad got tired of making them, and he tried to discontinue them, and people kept asking for them, and we're still making them. It's our most popular chair. So Dad had this theory that if you had a good design, it didn't have to change because people had changed, because the styles had changed. He thought a good design was a good design forever, which is, I think that's a Mingei thing also. It's just people don't have the patience, and some of the materials are not as good as they used to be anymore. We have trouble getting the grass for the seats now. And there they are. That's a more recent production. Excuse me? I had thought that they're so complicated to make, nobody would really want to copy them. But at one point, I'll go back to this, Dad was teaching design and craftsmanship at National Institute of Design in Ahmedabad, India. And he gave them the drawings for this and taught them how to make these chairs in the 1960s. And somebody in India is still making them. We don't know who it is, but they're being sold in India as real Nakashima chairs. So we've been having a lot of trouble trying to figure out what happened to that and how to authenticate them. We can't authenticate them because they weren't made in New Hope, but they have been copied. So beware, if you buy anything on eBay, make sure it's the real thing. This is me in the workshop in about 1955. This is the workshop at a later year. We redid it several times. I think this is the 1980s or so, because we had done one expansion. We expanded it into that carport and built another workroom because we didn't have enough space. It's been built over several times. This is the interior of the house that Dad built. He built the house literally with his own two hands. And of course, we've had to redo things over the years. The plumbing had to be redone. The electricity had to be redone. The electrician said, how did anybody build like that? He wasn't an electrician, but we survived and the house didn't burn down. He also, I don't think I have any pictures of it, but the original roof was made with concrete tiles that Dad poured himself. And after a certain point, the roof leaked so badly he put another roof on top of it. So it's got a different roof now, but this is the old version of the house. That's the way it looked inside. The chair on the left, the little chair there is called the Mira chair. The chair in the middle is called the long chair. But all of the buildings face south, so we get a good bit of sunshine in the wintertime. These are three versions of the Mira chair, the low, medium, and high Mira chairs. When my brother came along, he was, I don't know, I guess he just didn't sit still the way I did. And he kept falling off the three-legged chair, so Dad made a four-legged chair for my brother. These are pictures of the walkway from the showroom to the house. I think it looks like that as we speak. The dogwood are blooming and the azalea are blooming. And the picture on the right is the entrance to the showroom, which was built in 1954 when my brother was born. My mom needed more space, and my Aunt Thelma, who was with me and with us in camp, came and took care of my brother and the office when he was born. This is the interior of the showroom. If some of you have been in Japan, you're aware of the way Japanese buildings are usually built. They incorporate the inside with the outside, and there's a lot of space that flows freely between the inside and the outside. Of course, it's kind of warmer most of Japan than most of the U.S., but all of our windows do face south, and they bring in a lot of light and a lot of sun in the wintertime. This is what we call the lounge chair. I don't think we have any lounge chairs here, do we? No, not yet. They come with, people come and pick out their arms. We have fancy arms like the one on the left there. It's a burl from Oregon. And sometimes we have less fancy arms like the one on the right. It's a walnut arm. And people can come out there, pick out their seats too. There's a variation in the seats. This is the lumber storage that was built in 1956. These are actually the first thin warped shell construction on our campus. And there was some directions of how to make hyperbolic paraboloid shells that came out of England, and they were basing it on just regular timbers, 2x4s. And Dad thought, well, if it works for 2x4s, it should work for plywood. So he did it in plywood, and there's kind of like minimal support when you're building it, and they stayed up. They're still in perfect condition since 1956, and they're pretty nice spaces for storing lumber. This was built in 1960. It's a conoid shell. It's probably the most difficult one to build on the property because it's reinforced concrete. It's only 2 inches thick, or 2.5 inches thick. And it's round on one end and basically flat on the other. And it's still standing, and that's our design studio inside. That is from the other side. You can see that there's this big reinforced concrete arch on the south side that holds up that end of the roof. But that gets so much sun in the wintertime. It gets too hot sometimes. It's a wonderful thing using solar energy. This is the conoid chair that was developed and named after the conoid studio. And when it first came out, there was a furniture engineer who wrote an article in a magazine, said, you shouldn't build a chair like that. What do you think you're doing, building a 2-legged wooden chair? You'll be sewed up and down, it'll break. And Dad had been an architect before he went to furniture, and he knew the strength of materials, and he knew the kind of joinery he would need to put it together, and we have much less breakage with this chair than we do with our regular turn leg chairs. This is called the conoid table, very simple base, but he happened to get some beautiful planks of English walnut at the time, and I know you realize that Nakashima used a lot of butterflies, and he became famous for his use of butterflies, but you can use planks like this even though they've got holes in them if you use the butterflies. This is called the conoid room divider. It's a pretty big space. It's a 40 by 40 foot span of clear space. So it's nice to have something in between one part of the room and the other, but it doesn't cut it off completely. I think it's 24 inches off the ground, and it's finished on the back as well as the front. So it looks nice, and it sort of divides the space but doesn't cut it off. This is the pool house that he built in 1960. Another form of conoid shell. It's made of plywood, and then he designed the swimming pool as well, and they both won prizes in 1960 for their design. This is the inside of the pool house. And this is another HP shell. It was built in 1967 as a gallery for our dad's friend Ben Sean, who was an artist. You're familiar with his work? Now, Ben and Dad were really good friends, and Ben said, I don't have a gallery. So Dad said, I'll build you a gallery. So he built this lovely building in 1967. Ben designed a mosaic for it there on the left-hand side. But unfortunately, he passed away in 1969 before the mosaic was finished. So my dad and brother took the maquette to Chartres, France, and had it made in 8 pieces and installed in 1971 in Ben's memory. This is the last building that my father built. It's the reception house. I think he thought he and my mother were going to move into it when they retired, but they never retired, and Mom said there wasn't enough closet space. So she never moved. But this is the interior. We had just finished the Rockefeller job, or we were actually still building the Rockefeller job when he was building this building, and he wanted to because he was, I think he had more money than he usually did. So he was able to use the finest materials available to him. I don't have any pictures here of the walls, but the walls were imported from Japan. They're called kyokabe. They're sort of a natural texture, natural color plaster, which is used often in Kyoto for tea houses and temples. And that table on the lower left is the dining table, which he calls the sanso table, but it is the same shape as the peace altars, which emerged a little bit later with a bigger log. And this is another kind of shell, a hyperbolic paraboloid shell in concrete, which my father designed for a church in Kyoto. And when I was in college, in graduate school, so it became my graduate school project. And it's, I think it's probably the only one of its kind. In earthquake country, it was quite an adventure building it. This is the interior. And this is a chapel that my father built in Abiquiu, New Mexico. I don't know if any of you have been there. Have you? It's a beautiful, beautiful part of the country. And again, I guess you would call this indigenous architecture. The adobe and the stone were taken directly from the property itself. It was built in 1972, and it's still in excellent condition and in constant use. There are a community of Benedictine monks who live there and have their services there every day. I wish I had a pointer here. Is not a pointer? No, I guess not. The clerestory windows are on all 4 sides of the chapel. So if you go in there any time of day, you can see the sky and you can see the mountains outside, and they're always different. It's a beautiful thing. And they do the Gregorian chants inside. So my husband and I have been going there almost every year for a retreat. They do take guests. That's the entrance to the chapel on the right-hand side. The doors were carved in Mexico. And that's their little statue of St. Francis, who is looking a little worn out, in the guest house. I keep thinking I should try to fix him. And this is the other chapel that my dad designed out of adobe. It's in San Miguel de Allende, outside of Mexico City, and it has the Guanajuato roof. It's built sort of like an igloo would be built, but it's all adobe brick. And this is the Rockefeller House that Dad built in 1975. There are a lot of pieces in that house that are different than anything we've ever built before. And I finally got to see it last year, I think. That's the dining table, not as big as yours. And these are the green rock ottomans that he designed for the Rockefellers. And their decorators said, oh, my parents had gone to Japan and picked out these Mingei fabrics for them and offered them to them. And they said, the decorator says, oh, it doesn't match their Chinese antiques. So they rejected them. We got them. And this is the Rockefellers' conoid bench. And this is the table at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which is a book-matched English walnut table. They've changed this room now. They needed it for exhibition space, so they moved the furniture around. But Dad said he didn't want it to be on exhibit. He wanted it to be used, so it gets used. And this is the sister. Oh, no, this is the table that's here. This is one of two planks of zebra wood, which Dad used, and it was in his last show, the Full Circle show, and it ended up here. I think it was the last venue. And was it Martha or Rob or somebody said, well, we should have that for the director's office. So that is in your museum as well. We have the twin to it in for repair in the shop as we speak. But this ears is in really good shape. I checked it out yesterday. And these are two lamps that we still make. Each one of those bases is different. People come and pick out their own piece of wood, and we work around it. The Bahut on the left is pretty big. You can't really tell from the picture, but it's about 5 feet wide and tall. The table on the right was designed originally for a project in Frenchman's Cove, Jamaica, and I shudder to think what happened to them all. They sent me a picture of some really beat up furniture. They wanted to have one of our men come down and spend 2 weeks and fix it all, and they said, well, we can't possibly fix it in 2 weeks, and we need machinery that they don't have, so that didn't happen. I don't know. It's kind of sad seeing something go to seed the way it has gone, but we still make Frenchman's Cove tables. You've got the best of the crop here. And this is one of the two pieces that belong to the Krosnicks. When my dad had his last show, this is persimmon wood, and there's Ben Shahn prints inside. It belonged to the Krosnick family, and they condescended to loan it to us for the Full Circle show, and it was one of two pieces that did not burn to the ground when their house burned down. So the moral of the story is, if somebody wants to borrow your artwork for a show, don't say no. This is the other piece that they loaned to our show. It doesn't show how big it is, but it's actually an 8-foot round cut of redwood root. This is a smaller installation that I did after my dad died. It's at the James A. Michener Art Museum in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. It's a Claro walnut burl. And this is our lumber shed, which we had to build after my dad passed. He had stacks and stacks of wood that he had milled personally. That's the way we do it. We buy trees whole, and we go to the lumber yard. We didn't go to the lumber yard. We go to the Sawyer and oversee all of the milling. And Dad is very particular about the thicknesses of the wood he cuts. Some of them will be thick for chair seats and pieces of tables, and some of them will be thinner For tabletop, the woodworkers this morning asked me how thick we cut it. And I said, well, it depends on what you're making. So Dad looks at the log and decides what it wants to be and cuts the thickness accordingly. He cut things, I don't think I have done them in 1/8-inch increments as much as he did, because we always lose wood when we're planing it anyway. So, but he said he wanted it cut in 1/8-inch increments. That's very exacting. And that's a pile of little burls up there on the top, and some of our tools that we use. We still do all our drawings by hand. I believe that the hand, the mind connection, even with a piece of paper and a pencil, is very different than trying to design things on a computer. We still do all our designs by hand. And this is our finishing process. We now use a tung oil varnish that is polymerized in small batches in New England, and it's a non-toxic finish, and we're very glad that it works, because they changed the ingredients of the other finishes. We couldn't get them anymore. And that's my husband when his hair was darker also and more plentiful. He's been shaving spindles for chairs for 50 years. And he still seems to enjoy doing it. My daughter says he just meditates while he's shaving spindles, and so I guess that's a good thing. That's what Yanagi said too. There's a variety in sameness. Even though you're making the same shaped pots over and over again, it's always at a different time. Your hands are in a different place. The material's slightly different, and there is a variety in sameness. And I guess that's true of spindles too. So this is our group of artisans from quite a long time ago who work with us in Japan from Sakura Seisakusho. They're the only people in the world who are licensed to make Nakashima designs. And they give us a royalty every year. They were great to work with. They're such good craftsmen. This is it's one of the Mingei bases. When Dad went to Japan, he had, I forget, 10 shows maybe during his lifetime, and he kept designing things in honor of the Mingei group. And this is a Mingei 4. You can't see the base, but it's a Mingei 4 table. It's 13 feet long and 39 inches wide. It's a piece of English oak burl. And there's a twin to it in Japan. These are 2 more Mingei bases, smaller pieces of English oak burl. And these are some of the lamps we make from parts that are manufactured in Japan. They're hinoki, they're white cedar, and the Japanese are really good at making very intricate grill work like that. Mostly, it used to be mostly for architecture, but Dad thought it was so beautiful that he wanted to use it in furniture as well. This is a cabinet made with the same pattern. It's called the Asanoha pattern. You've probably seen it in fabrics. But you can count the number of joints that go together there. They fit perfectly. And these were made before they had laser saws that they have now. And this is the entryway to the Takamatsu shop at Sakura. And Ben Sean's son, Johnny, was a sculptor. And he did the sculpture of my father after he passed away. But they have one in the entryway. As soon as you go into the shop at Sakura, there's Dad facing you. And this is Kosuke Nagami. He's the son of Shinichi Nagami, who was with my father when they were working together. This is from a show we did last year in November in Tokyo. And while we were there, we went to Takamatsu, and they took us to this lovely building with the wall. It's made of little pieces of cuts of wood. And this is at a friend. We met a man named Tak Yoshino, who is a chair maker. He's also an educator. He teaches people how to do woodworking, and he has this tremendous, I think there's 300 different kinds of chairs that he stores in his house. And he calls it the chair laboratory. And here he is at the gallery in Tokyo, where the show was, with his wife and his son. And last year when we went to Japan, my husband had heard that my dad, towards the end of his life, had gone to see the great Yakusugi in Yakushima in Japan. He says, we got to do this too before it's too late. So we went. We didn't get to see the biggest one. It was a pretty long hike up the trail, and we didn't have enough time, and I didn't have enough energy, but we did see some of these great trees. Some of them are some of the oldest trees on Earth, but they have died, and they are sprouting new growth, which grows around them, and but the old roots are still there, holding up. It was quite an experience. Yakushima, if you ever go to Japan, it's one of the southern islands. It's remarkable. The whole ecology there is different. The stones are of basalt or something, and it purifies the water so that nothing grows. I mean, there's no algae, there's no fish, there's no bugs, and the trees wouldn't grow except for the moss. It rains every day so that the moss grows, and then the trees can take root. And then we met this woodworker whose name is Nakashima. And he gathers the dead trees, the dead sugi, and he makes things out of them. This is, on the right-hand side is his workshop, and he has this piece of tree standing in his workshop. But he's the one who took my father and my brother up to see the big tree back in 1985. He was just a lovely man, and we were very happy to have met him. And Taki Yoshino said that he saved this one big oak tree that's in the national forest near the foot of Mount Fuji. And he had to fill out all kinds of paperwork for the government to get permission to harvest the tree and take it to the lumber yard and make it into lumber. So we tagged along with him from the base of the tree that he had rescued and to the lumber yard where they cut it into lumber. And he took us to the shrine also. They apparently were going through the civil wars in Japan, and one of the daimyo went and prayed at this little shrine where these sacred trees are, and the war turned, and they weren't killed, and so the trees are honored as spirits. You can see the prayer papers wrapped around their trunks. Oh, and this is a project I did with Michael Gabellini back in 1997, and he used up some of the biggest planks of wood we had, but it was a commercial place. It was a boutique. It was very expensive, and the clothes were expensive, and they closed. I don't know what they did with all the furniture, but it was quite a spectacular installation. And this is another boutique that he designed in Hamburg, Germany. I believe that's still intact. And the table on the left is one that I recently discovered at the University of Pittsburgh. Dad did a number of pieces at University of Pittsburgh, also at Carnegie Mellon. But we were invited to Pittsburgh, and this was in the engineering department, and the engineering department had no idea that they had a Nakashima collection there. And I have no idea how they made it in our shop. This table, it's book matched, it's 16 feet long, and I think it's over 50, I think it's almost 5 feet wide at the wide end. It was just a remarkable discovery. The table on the right is a table that I made fairly recently for the Portland Japanese Garden. The fellow on the right there is my youngest son, and then my cousin's in the middle, and the director of the Portland Museum the Portland Garden is there on the left, but we made their conference table out of Oregon maple. And this is a chair that I designed for some musician friends of mine. They said well, first of all, I told them I would loan them some Nakashima chairs for their concert because I thought their chairs were ugly that they were using before. And then they came back and said, oh, they don't work for us. They're slanted back, they're scooped out, and the backs get in our way when we're bowing. So I said, okay, I'll make you a flat seat with a back that doesn't get in the way. And so we call it the Concordia chair. I designed it in 2003, and we're still making them. We're finally selling them. And that's called the Maya table. I named it after my granddaughter Maya on the top, and the one on the bottom is called the Simon table because I made it first for Mr. Simon. He said he didn't like the heavy, solid bases. He wanted something that was round and open. So that's what I came up with. And this is another big table we made for sunset settings in Texas. And I think it was 16 or 18 feet long, and it was about 6 feet wide or something. And so I designed this base that was sturdy enough to hold it up. We call it the sunset base. And this is a tsuitate, otherwise known as a standing piece. We had some these wonderful maple roots that came into our collection, and we didn't know quite what to do with them, but they make really beautiful decorative pieces. And this is a tsuitate sofa. If you have a place where you need a sofa and it's visible from both sides, it's I thought it was a good use for those burls. These are the folks in Ahmedabad, India. They had a 50th anniversary celebration from when my father used to teach there. And so my brother and my husband and I went over, and Kosuke from Japan joined us too. So we got to meet them and see all of the rosewood conoid chairs that they had from that period of time. And I went to visit Joseph Walsh in Ireland. He has a symposium every year that's called Making In, and he invites different craftspeople from around the world to come and present for him. And he has an ongoing apprentice system. This is one of his apprentices from Japan in the bottom photograph. And this fellow in the top photograph came and he gave Joseph Walsh a very special chisel or something, and so he's demonstrating it for Joseph. And he is a lovely person. I don't know if you want to invite him to the Mingei sometime, but he's a wonderful craftsperson. Very different aesthetic than we have, different techniques he uses. Ireland's a great place to visit too. And this is our peace altar, the very first peace altar that Dad designed in 1986. It's at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City. This is the one we made in 1995 for the 50th anniversary of the UN. As you can see, there are people from all faiths and all nations and all races gathered around that table, and that's the way Dad thought they should be used. If we had a place like that on each continent of the world, we might be a little closer to world peace. That table finally went to Moscow in 2001. I hope it's still there at the Academy of Art. And there's another one. Oh, this is the one. It went to the Hague Appeal for Peace in 1999 on the way to Moscow. And this is the one that we sent to India. And when did we get there? This is 2014, but it was there from 1996 or so. And this is our workshop today. Michael Veith is one of our best craftsmen there, and he's working on a piece of of English oak burl. And as you can see, he's using a lot of different color pigments to fill the cracks and the wormholes. It's not easy. And on the left is the finished table. I'm sorry, yes. Oh, yeah, that makes a big difference. Yeah, he's using a lot of different colors to fill the wormholes and cracks. And the finished table is up there on the left. And this is a table that is even longer than yours. Sorry, but it's 41 feet long. We made it in 4 parts. It does have the same kind of base, the Frenchman's Cove base. And that's Michael Veith there on the left. He's the craftsman. And our designer is there, Jason Neal is there on the right. And I couldn't do what I do without them. It's in New York City. Yeah, I have a picture of it. It's not a very good picture, but that's when we were trying to figure out how to to get a 41-foot long table and out of well, we had to find a tree that had enough wood that we could match to make a table that long and that wide. And there it is in New York. It went up the stairs, and they've got it all lined up together. Don't ask me why they had to have a 41-foot long table, but they do. Maybe. And this is a little table that we made for Prime Minister Kishida from Japan when he was here last month. And John and I got to go to the White House for dinner and got to shake hands with him for a few seconds. This is what we normally do. We have to replace our machines every now and then. And we do have lectures and events at the Arts Building for our foundation occasionally. And this is the most recent staff picture I have. We haven't been able to gather everybody together in one place recently. So this is from 2020. But Jerry, who's there in the center, is the one who worked with us for 50 years and decided it was time to retire. So this is a retirement party. And that's my brother Kevin. He passed away shortly after this picture was taken. So I don't do it alone. It's a lot of work. There's about 17 of us now. And these are the historic markers that we had one in 2008 and another in 2014. So I guess that's why we get so many visitors. There's people that want to see the architecture, and I think they have a sense of peace, I think, when they come to the property. And we, during the COVID shutdown, all the time from 1970 when I came to Nakashima's, I had worked a 6-day week. And when we shut down and couldn't have visitors on Saturday, I really liked it. I only had a 5-day week. So we don't have our open house. It was getting way too crowded. We're not set up for, sequential parking and scheduling and all that stuff. So we now only have guided tours, and so we can manage the traffic a little better. But our guided tours are sold out for the year. We do have special tours that we can arrange. If you have a group of 20 or so, we can arrange a special tour still. But our regular weekend tours are sold out for the year. So I hope you can come see us sometime, or if you need some furniture, come visit us or get in touch with us. I forgot my cards. But our website is nakashimawoodworkers.com. You can get all the information from that. So thank you so much.